Hello, everybody. Thanks for joining me on yet another talk on AI, but this time with a different lens. Uh, what I'm trying to answer in 50 minutes is what does it mean to be open for a large language model? We hear a lot of words like open weight, open source, open data, open science. What does it mean exactly? So I called it from OpenAI to open source AI. And let's embark on a journey together and navigate all the shades, all the different positioning that you can have between commercial ownership of LLMs and collaborative openness. I am Raphaël Sémété. I'm French, based in Paris. I worked for Worldline for quite a few years. Currently, I'm in head of DevRel. I'm a senior architect, and I'm an open source expert. That's the important part of this slide. I also do yoga. I'm a yoga teacher. That's not that relevant for this presentation. And here are all the information if you want to get in touch with me. I work for Worldline. Who knows Worldline? Right? So Worldline is in the payment industry. We hire a lot of engineers. We do R&D, including AI, and we deal every day with heavy regulated and critical transactional flows, right? But let's go back to the subject of this presentation, and AI, and in particular LLM. Just a quick reminder, I mean, you've seen that kind of formation, and you know it for quite a while already, but a few years back, we had language models, but there were very statistical models. There still are, though, but not that efficient. So it was not very good for large use, right? Everything changed in 2017 when Google Research published the Attention is All You Need paper and created the transformer architecture. This unlocked the capacities of the languages and started the era of large language model with all the buzz and the activity and dynamism fueled by ChatGPT, the rise of multimodality, questions about responsible use of such powerful tools. And this talk, when I started to give it like 1 year ago, but I update it because it's going so fast every time, I was speaking about what will be tomorrow, maybe. And I was speaking about small language models, agents. Obviously, tomorrow is today. 1 year is 1 decade in engineering right now. And I still expect some new users to emerge on the mobile. So tiny model running on our devices and large action model and robotics. But that's not the subject. Let's focus right now on LLM. And I state that GenAI, and LLM in particular, is having its Linux moment. As I said, the important information from the previous slide was I'm an open source expert. And with this expertise, and I was born, I mean, in the IT domain at the same time as the internet and the rise of open source as a way to produce software at large scale. And I do recognize the same pattern when I see the adoption of GenAI and LLMs and the adoption of open source, right? With 3 or 4 phases. So just like open source, it's all started in labs and universities where we speak about kind of open research, where researchers are used to share the result of their findings and for others to reuse and collaboratively build on top of it and then create and innovate further, right? Both open source and GenAI. And then it got adopted when the usage was ready by individuals. Open source, it started like geeks like me, you know, compiling their own distribution, Linux distribution, and trying to install things. So it took quite a time. With GenAI, it took 2 weeks maybe, with ChatGPT to the usage to become massive and planetary, right? So because of the usage changes, then it prevails and it diffuse or infuse inside businesses and enterprises, right? So we're in this phase where there's a lot of business involved, billions and billions, a lot of VCs, a lot of startups, a lot of competition. We're in the competition phase, right? And if it follows the same trends that I observed with open source, I predict that LLM themselves will become commodities in a few years, right? The competition will go up the scale, and people will start to innovate and compete on the upper level of what we build on top of LLMs, right? So it's just like open source, but it's going much, much, much faster, right? So it's a little bit dizzy. It's a little bit difficult to have some clarity in such a changing and dynamic or crazy even domain. And a good reflex that I have in that kind of case is to step back a little bit and to try to find a compass, to navigate and understand what's going on, right? And this compass for me, just like with open source, are the licenses. Check the licenses of the component that you want to adopt and to integrate into your business application to build your critical services on, just like with open source component, open source software, right? So let's use the notion of licenses and term of use to understand what are the different positioning and maybe strategy of several actors when they release their models on the market, right? So to do that, I needed this compass, this map. So I went to see the AI engineers in the company. There's one way. Yeah, I see you. And I asked them, all right, what should I check when we speak about a model, an LLM? What are the artifacts, the component? Because it's quite of a complex system, even to build it, to train it. What should I look at to evaluate the openness and to check the license and how open is the model at the end? And they told me, okay, they came up with this very, very simplified schema, and we could discuss that, yes, maybe in the last column, we speak about reinforced, but we should speak about preferences, alignment, and stuff. But basically, you have that kind of models, foundational models, all right, with a large, very large, actually, data sets that were used to train them. Then they can be fine-tuned or specialized with a smaller data set, and they can be even reinforced or aligned with such techniques or preferences or DPO or stuff like that, right? And they told me, all right, the first thing that you have to check, obviously, is the model. And when they speak about the model, they speak about the weight. They say when you're AI researchers and you know the architecture of a model, it's not that complex to reproduce. What is very useful is the weight, which means is the result of the training phase of the neural network. So it's the parameters of the neural networks. If you have those weights, then you can reproduce the architecture of the neural network and configure it so you reproduce the neural network itself. So you have the LLM locally, right? You can do that. Okay, so that's the first thing. If it's open or not, what are the limitations of reusing those weights? They said, obviously, then there's the data. If you want to have more knowledge about how the model was trained, on which kind of data, and what could be the bias, or if you want to change something in the training mechanism of the model, you should have access to the data, whether it's the pre-training dataset, the large dataset, or a smaller dataset used for fine-tuning or reinforcement, right? They said also, when it's reinforced, there's most of the time an intermediate model that is called the reward model that nobody really speaks about normally, which is trained on the human feedback, but then is used to train the reinforced model at the end. And that's a good sign of openness if this is visible or displayed in a way, right? And they say, of course, code is okay. If you have some code, it's interesting. Again, not the code to reproduce the model itself, but all the data processing code. Is it available? How do we manage all the flows, prepare the data, do all the heavy lifting, right, about training the model? And they say if you have access to those main components, it gives you an idea about how easy it is for you to reproduce scientifically the training and the creation of the model in-house, right? So based on that, I said, OK, let's build a very simple matrix. Here you have the different artifacts, so the model, data, the code, right? And let's have a scale of 0. 0 means it's completely closed. You have no access. It's a black box. You don't know anything about the artifact, whether it's the model, the data, or the source code, right? And it goes up to 4. It's completely open in the term of open source. So it means that you have access to it, you can modify it, and you can redistribute the modification without any restriction. And in between, you have 1. there are some public research, some research papers that are published, right? 2, it's restricted. You need to have a special agreement to access to the artifact, whether it's a commercial or research, for instance. And 3, it's open. You can use it, reuse it, change, modify, but you might have some limitation about what you can do with the artifact. Right? And based on this map, what I want to do now is to analyze some of the actors, some of the models to understand what we can or cannot do and learn on the way what are the stuff to focus about. Right? Based on this first matrix, what we can do, just some, that's my vocabulary, right? Except the first one, open weight, right? We speak about a lot of open weight. Well, it's pretty straightforward. It's the weights are available. It's open. So let's say it's open. It can be open with limitation, and I will speak about restricted open weight model. And it can be completely open. I will speak about permissive open weight model. Remember, that's the open source license, permissive license or not, you know, this one. You can have also open data. The data is available, maybe with some restriction, right? And you can speak about open source, but you see open source, it's just in this box. Just this one. And when you have everything that is available, then I speak about open science because it's a scientific experiment that you can reproduce exactly because you have all the components that you can have in-house and reproduce exactly the stuff, right? So let's use this model and analyze some of the big players. Let's start with Google. So as I said, Google invented the transformer architecture and started in 2018 the BERT project. The T of BERT is transformer, right? So it was pretty open research, all right? The model and the code were completely available. There was some few limitation of the data set, but we were really in the open search area. Then we entered the phase of the business and the enterprise. You remember the 4 phases of the adoption. And starting 2022 with the Palm family of model and then now Gemini, they closed everything, right? Black box. You don't have access to anything. There is value in these models. We have to make money. It costs a lot of money to train. So we need to monetize it, right? But they did something in 2024 that was more pragmatic. After a few years, they said, all right, let's have Gemini, but let's have another version that is called Gemma that will be kind of open, right? That's why there's a tree. It's open, but with some limitation that we will see. You don't have any access to the data, and the code is completely available, right? They give you all the code, all the instruction, all the tutorials for you to be able to fine-tune Gemma. Maybe it's because they're cloud service provider. You fine-tune on their infrastructure, and then you will run the model on their infrastructure also. Not mandatory, but possible, right? So this profile is open weight, right? The weights are open. The code, okay, is available, but there's no access to any data. You don't know how it was trained, right? Why are there some limitation? If you check, and that's the reflex that I want, if you remember one thing from this talk is just step back and check the licenses, right? When you check the licenses of Gemma, somewhere it's written, okay, don't do bad things with that, right? You're not allowed to use Gemma or fine-tuned version of Gemma to do illegal activities, practice, unlicensed practice of a profession, promotion of abuse, violence, and stuff like that. That is called responsible AI, right? Responsible use of AI, right? But by doing that, they not fulfilling the open source definition because they limit the usage of what you can do with the model. So here, yes, we all agree that's bad. Don't do bad things, right? But you have to have that in mind, right? Okay, let's analyze another one, OpenAI, right? OpenAI started as a non-profit organization for the advancements of AI for the good of humankind, let's say, in the US. Hence the name, OpenAI, right? And with their generative pre-trained transformer family of models, they started also kind of the open, let's say open weight. You see the profile, it's completely open, the model were completely open, and the code available for version 1 and 2. But then with the business phase of the adoption, now they saw the value of it, and they said, let's close everything. So same move as Google, right? So starting version 3, everything closed. ChatGPT and O1, ChatGPT is fine-tuned version for human conversation, right? And O1, the first reasoning model they had, they were described in our research article okay? But not much, right? So you can see here, there's the same kind of move when you enter the enterprise phase, the business phase. People start to invest a lot of money, so they want their money back. So they want to sell something, right? But this is not only the only thing. It's close, but again, let's step back and check the term of use. And in the term of use, it's written somewhere, you can't use results produced by our model to train a competitive model. So basically, no commercial model can be trained on OpenAI, on data coming from OpenAI. Important restriction. Okay, you have to remember that. Okay, so always check the licenses. Then, more recently, like a few months ago, finally, after 6 years, they say, oh, let's go back to the open something, right? And they release GPT OSS for open source. So you understood. And if you look at the profile, that it's more open weight. It's not open source per se, all right? Because whatever the name is, at the end of the day, you have access to the model, to the weight, all right? So you can use it, run it locally, you can fine-tune it, all right? You have all the code to do that, but you don't have any access to the data it was trained or fine-tuned or reinforced on, right? But the question is, why did they wait 6 years to do that, right? They stopped, and 6 years after they say, yes, now we're doing it. So it's acknowledged the fact that something is going on there, and they had to have an open weight model also because of the competition. Maybe you will see. Whatever. When you check, and that's why it's a score here of 4, because they adopted a completely permissive open weight license. So it's an open source license, actually, Apache 2, unmodified, and the usage policy, basically they say you have to respect the law, which is okay, right? It's not like you can't do that kind of thing or that kind of thing. You have to respect the law. That's no problem, right? So 6 years. Another big player, maybe part of the pressure that was put on OpenAI, except from maybe the more open project coming from China and Alibaba with Xuan, or Quen, let's say Xuan, right? So they used a different path, but at the end, they have the same kind of positioning as Google and OpenAI. They started with the first version of the Xuan family, and they still have this restricted open weight license for all the 7.2b version of their model. It means that the large model are still under this restricted license, which is there, and who puts a limitation. If you are using Xuan or derivative of Xuan, and you have more than 100 million monthly active users, then you should come and talk to us. All right. So limit the usage. All right. So be careful about that kind of restriction, of course. And they have the same thing also as OpenAI. Don't use output produced by the Xuan models when it's from these versions, the first generation of Xuan and the 72B version in every family. You can't use output to train your own model, except if it's for research only. But you don't have to compete with us, right? Interesting. And what they did also, they changed in 2024. They had 2 different ways to deploy their model, to release them. They had it starting with Xuan 2, 2.5, and 3. They moved to a completely permissive open weight license. So you still don't have access to the data, right? But now they removed the limitation. But you see, the strategy here is for medium model. They say, OK, medium model, you can fine-tune, no problem. If it's a large model, you have some limitation if you are doing a lot of business with it, and you can train a competitive model, competitor with that. And for the very large model, like this year, the Xuan 3 Max, which is available only through APIs, it's completely closed. So you see a different kind of positioning, and you can understand that by checking the license. Again, good reflex to adopt, right? So what are the other big players doing here? Well, it's a gold rush, all right? So everybody wants to have a piece of the cake, obviously. So I could have analyzed all the big players and all the providers of LLM, but that would be too long and not that interesting. Let's say that whatever they do, they create their own models, whether they're open open weight or close. For instance, Microsoft with Phi, which is a permissive open weight, just like Granite with or Granite, yes, from IBM. OpenELM from Apple is interesting because it's a fully open foundational model, right? And you can also have some closed model like Titan and Nova by AWS. Or what they do, because in this vision of AI, you have to centralize everything, right? You have to make money, you invest a lot of money, and you have to get the value back from your investment, right? So you need infrastructure to run the models. And so when they don't have it, they partners to have the access to this infrastructure to do the inference and to do the training. Right, so you know, of course, of the partnership between OpenAI and Microsoft. Anthropic is running on AWS, and Grok is trained now on Colossus, but the inference is made on OCI, so the Oracle Cloud Infrastructure. Right. So interesting. Let's check this one because I didn't speak about this one. Now it's the time. I call it a challenger, Meta. Meta, who is not a cloud service provider, and maybe that explains the difference, right? They started also in the open research, let's say, with open weight model, like Roberta. From the name, you infer that it's based on BERT, right? And the transformer architecture. So a pure open weight profile, no access to data, right? And then with the enterprise phase of the adoption curve of everything, with the LLaMA family of model, they were the first, actually, in 2018, to release, the first big player to release a model under this open weight profile, right? And they said, and that was kind maybe of marketing, they say, we are open source. Right, at that time. And they still say we are open source, actually. But you understand that, to me at least, in the and whatever the vocabulary is, it's not open source because you don't have access to the data, right? You don't know what are the data set that they were trained off, right? And they're not open source also because since then, they never stopped restricting more and more the usage of LLaMA. Let's explain. With version 2, they said, OK, if you are a business with more than 700 million monthly active users, so the same kind of clause, actually they were the first to do that, the same kind of Schwen, they said, then you have to purchase a commercial license from us, right? So that was the first restriction, OK? Then with LLaMA 3, they came up with, OK, we are not a cloud service provider. Maybe, that's me inferring here. So we're not making that much money with people fine-tuning LLaMA. So at least we want to have the paternity of it, right? So they put more restriction, and they said, you have to specify somewhere that this model was fine-tuned, was derived, was built with Meta LLaMA 3. Right? And even in the name of your model, you should start it with LLaMA 3. So please acknowledge that it's coming from Meta, right? First wave of restriction with LLaMA 3. And LLaMA 4 is even worse because basically LLaMA 4 is banned from Europe. I mean, it's not that advertised, but if you check the license, it's clearly specified. If you're an individual or a company living in the European Union, you don't have the right to use LLaMA 4, right? Why? Maybe there's a link between the geopolitics and the AI acts and whatever. Whatever the reason is, it's clearly stated here. So again, step back, have this reflex before adopting a model and building a critical service on that. What are the restrictions? What can I do? What can't I do, right? But because they were the first to really open things, and let's say start this open weight wave of models, well, other actors started to do that. First in the research domain, academics, with 2 universities in the US. And I only have one table because they have the same profile here, right? So they created fine-tuned version of LLaMA, right? LLaMA 2. So they inherit the level of openness of the foundational model based on the model and the pre-trained data set. So they have 1 here, no access to data. But you might say, OK, but Raphael, you put a 2 there, it should be 3 because it was a restricted open weight model, LLaMA 3. Yes, but because what they did, they used reserve from OpenAI through the shared GPT project to gather some information and do the fine-tuning. And by doing that, they have the restriction. I don't know if it's all in front of a court, but that was the initial intent, at least, of OpenAI. Say, don't use results from OpenAI, from GPT, to train your model if it's a competitor, right? So it's for research only. That's OK. They are university. More recently, a startup in the Bay Area. I mean, Deep Cogito also did a fine-tuned version of LLaMA 3.2, I guess. So with the first version, they released this model, and basically what they do, they have their own proprietary training process to add some more capacity, kind of reasoning capacity on top of LLaMA 3.2, right? Which always stayed private. Always, they have their IP. It's not open. It's not released, right? But they were able to release this first version. I was surprised at the beginning because I said, but they have the limitation for LLaMA 3. You know, you have to put LLaMA 3 in the beginning of the name, which I don't see. I don't know. And you have some limitation. And few months after that, they just swapped the model and used Schwen. So now they have a completely permissive open weight model. And that's what I meant when I was speaking about LLM becoming commodities. That's an example, you know. They were able to kind of quickly, it's not the only reason the license, of course. It's not. But they were able to quickly remove one brick to replace it by another one, more open, because it was fitting maybe more the use case and not only the license aspect. I do agree with that. But they just ported their own proprietary training mechanism on another foundational model. So you see this notion of commodity emerging right now. Okay, you have more open weight challengers. I picked up two. One is well-known DeepSeek because it made a lot of buzz a few months ago because it was a competitor to OpenAI reasoning model at the time. Basically, it's a permissive open weight reasoning model, so it has the open weight profile again. So you have access to all the weights. You can reproduce it very easily, but you don't know anything about the data. The code is available. They did something very interesting. They also released distill model. So distillation, what is distillation? Basically, it's when you use a larger thinking model, all right, to train an existing smaller model, right? So there is a knowledge transfer between the professor, yes, and the students. So they learn by mimicking some knowledge from the first model, right? What is interesting in this case, they use Schwen 2.5 and LLaMA. In this case, the model, even modified, supercharged, they keep their original licenses, right? Another example, Mistral. French, I'm French. They have the same kind of profile, open weight, right? And since almost the start, they had this dual strategy, like let's have open weight model. That's where they enter the market by saying, yes, we're really open, right? Open weight. And at the same time, let's release some large version of the model, but behind APIs. So it's black box, right? So they have this dual offering, like it's open weight and it's closed commercial, right? For bigger model. They also innovated with the notion of sustainable openness, which is for their CodeStral model. So it's a code generation model. Basically, what they say in the license, which is the Mistral non-production license, everything is in the name, is you can play with it, but if you do production with that, you can't. Right, you have to purchase a license from us. And you can do also hosted services, but basically it will be production, so it's redundant. So you can see here, I recognize a pattern that I saw in open source with the emergence of different business models like open core, whatever you call it. You know, you have a community edition and enterprise edition. You have that kind of things, you know, that are going on here also. So let's use the market. Let's be present. Let's position ourselves. But you remember the Schwen positioning. Depending on the power, on the size of the model, I have different ways to deploy and to allow people to reuse it or not. Okay. So until now, I only spoke about open weight model. That's what we see now today, right? A lot. And you saw people, big players coming from large model who are saying, yes, but let's be open because there are other actors that are trying to enter the market and they start to be open weight also. But what about the data, right? So there were some in the research side, academic side of things. Like you see in this table, I selected just only a few of them. Project that decided to do open foundational LLMs, right? So basically tackle with data, right? So here you have one in the Emirates, another one in the US, one was European, and sometimes it's a consortium like in France with Lucy, right? Okay, what you see here basically is This middle line, the data, now start to become green, right? So for the first generation of models, like Falcon or Bloom, they still had some restriction on the weight, what you could do or could not do with the model, right? For Falcon, for instance, also on the pre-training dataset, described really clearly how the methodology they use to create the larger dataset, which is based on refined web, they even provided an extract of the dataset, but you don't have access to the whole dataset, right? That's why there's a grade of 3 only. But the other project, whether it's Bloom, Eliter AI, OpenLLaMA, or Lucy, they reused existing open dataset, or they created their own with the specific license, allowing others to use also, right? So here we enter the dynamism of collaborative innovation, right? People starting bricks and say, oh yes, maybe somebody else will be able to use it, right? So here you have it. And if you look at the Falcon license, for instance, here it's clear, and it's very clear. It means we are based on the Apache license version 2, but we made some modification, and they tell you, you should read this license carefully. Be aware. Because again, if you want to use it and do Falcon as a service, or put it behind hosted services or behind an API, you need a separate license. So it's not open anymore. Basically, you have to come and discuss with us. It means some money might be exchanged in the process, right? So be careful of modified open source licenses, because sometimes when you go on certain website or you read very quickly certain article, you say it's an Apache license. Done. Apache is open source, that's OK. But you might have some limitation, and you must be aware of it before adopting the LLM, right? Once you have that, those open foundational LLMs, right? Well, other people are able to fine-tune or to build on top of some of the bricks that you did open, right? That's the basic idea at the beginning, right? So here's a table of some of the project. There are many, many ones, but just I wanted to illustrate with some use cases. So the 3 first columns are interesting because they come from the enterprise world, right? So Dolly, okay, that was done by Databricks. What is interesting is that they were based on Eliter AI Pythia, which was a permissive open weight model, all right, or foundation completely open model, sorry. So they inherit the openness for the two first lines of the model and the pre-training dataset, and then they created their own fine-tuned dataset very quickly through Databricks employees, supposedly in a few weeks and stuff, whatever. They put a very clear license on it, and it's not a reinforced model, so there's no reward model used in the training process, and they release the code. So basically, they have quite a green profile, right? Bloom Chat, from the name, you understand that it's based on Bloom, right? So they also inherit the level of openness on the model and the pre-training dataset. And they had also a dataset for fine-tuning, but there are a few limitations. But nevertheless, they still open everything, right? The code. Zephyr, from Hugging Face, it was kind of an experiment. They said, OK, let's fine-tune Mistral, right? So that was a few months ago. Huh? But it's just examples, archetype. So based on Mistral, okay, so the model, the weights are completely open. The data is not available because they don't have it, right? And they created their own fine-tuned data set, but again, they use results coming from OpenAI. So they have a limitation there. And actually, I should have put a 2 in the model line, right? But again, so be careful about what foundational model the fine-tuned model is based on, because it can inherit some of the limitation, right? And then the 2 last columns are interesting because those are projects who really, from the start, are trying to do the most open model, the people who really want to reach this open source or even free AI, right? So LLM 360, it's a consortium between US and the Emirates, and they released everything in the open. So they started with foundational model and also fine-tuned version of the foundational model, right? So no reinforcement by human for LLM 360. And the Olmo model and the fine-tuned Olmo instruct model by the Allen AI Institute, right? Or Allen Institute for AI, sorry, is a good example of a completely open model where all the artifacts are clearly identified with clear licenses and clear access to the artifact. So whether it's the model, the pre-training dataset, actually it has a name, which is a good sign, and it's under an open license. Tulu also for the fine-tuning dataset, and they are one of the few who also released the ultra feedback. So all the model they use also to the model they use to align and to deal with preferences and the reinforcement, right? So here you have a good example of the dynamism of the collaborative communities, where again, maybe like they were used to do before in the open research domain, reuse the result of other projects to build on top of, right? Interesting fact is the first version of Olmo was not completely open. It was still restricted open weight because they had this license on the weight, which was again responsible AI. And it was like, don't do it for military purpose, don't do any biometric processing with Olmo model, and don't do any predictive administration of justice, law, immigration, asylum processes, etc., etc. So here, you have a good example. And then they changed. They said, let's go completely permissive. So with version 2 of Olmo, it's an Apache 2 license, right? So there's two things to notice here. The first one is there's a trend to more and more remove the responsible AI restriction from the open weight model. So you have a restricted open weight, and now you have a lot of permissive open weight. I don't know if it's linked to politics or geopolitics in the US and on the world. I don't know, but that's a trend that I do observe by just using my compass here. And the second thing is, well, now it's a little bit different. It's not bad thing. It's bad usage that they don't want you to use, or they didn't want you to use. So if you're building, I don't know, predictive administration of justice, for instance, and you want to use the LLaMA inside, somewhere in the application, with the version 1 of Olmo, that restricted use, you can't, right? So you definitely have to check what does it mean responsible usage for them, because it will apply to you at the end, right? So again, step back, take the reflex, check the licenses, check the terms of use, right? Other actors, because I only shared a few of them there, but other one to monitor maybe, because I spoke about DeepSeek, and DeepSeek made a lot of noise. Interesting thing, two projects are trying to do quite the same thing. The first one is led by Hugging Face, all right, in the US, with OpenR1. And the second one is a Chinese startup called OpenSeek, and their objective is to reproduce the same kind of model than DeepSeek, because DeepSeek described all they did, but in an open way, right? So they're in the process of doing it. So that would be interesting to see where they reach, you know. You might, and I'm used to that when I was like 25 years ago, or even more, yeah, whatever, promoting open source, you know, to big companies and stuff. People were telling me, but what will Linux do against, I don't know, Open Solaris, HP UX, and that kind of stuff? I mean, that's crazy. You're not, those people, I know, they're dreaming alive, you know, this is not reality here. Now you know where Linux is. So everything's possible, you know, and those guys, they're really trying hard to have open things. So to me, there's something going on here, and maybe that's explained why OpenAI, after 6 years, said, we have to go back at least for one model that we will release. We'll not provide it through ChatGPT, but we need to have an open weight model also, right? So, what did we learn on this exploratory journey, right? The global overview. Basically, today, and that was not the case 1 year ago, we're in the open weight era. A lot of models now are available in this category of model, right? You have restricted open weight, and when you're in that kind of model, check the license, because license is everything. That's where you will understand what you can or cannot do, right? So the weights are available, but you might have some restriction on it. We saw some of them, and some example are LLaMA family, Schwen when it's capped, we're on the monthly active users, Bloom, for instance, when you have a responsible AI restriction, right? So restricted open weight. Then you have permissive open weight. So everything is available except the data, right? So you can speak about commercial friendly or commercial freedom. So it's okay to use and reuse and to do commercial fine-tuned version of it because there's no limitation, but data is not available. You don't have access to it, right? And examples of that are JAMA, GPT, OSS, Schwen for the other versions. That's for the big players, and for the challengers who meet now in this specific domain of the arena, Mistral, DeepSeek, and Falcon, for the model that we checked with my lenses, right? Then you have closed API models, so flagship models, the biggest one, the most capable, those who cost so much money to train, they remain behind closed API, right? Because you have to make the money for it. It's completely black box, so that's Gemini, that's GPT, starting version family 3 to 5, that's Schwen for max version, and that's Mistral Large, for instance, for those that we did analyze, right? And then, it's rare, but it's possible. There are also truly open model, all right, with full reproducibility. Yes, I said it because for me it's not that easy to pronounce, but yes, it's the idea behind is it has to be open science. So how easy it is to reproduce the thing in a scientific way, right? And for us is to reuse the model, to change the training, maybe tweak with the data set, whatever, and create a new version or even a new model, but that is inspired for the previous one, right? So we speak about the models from Elifer AI, for instance, or Olmo from the Alan Institute for AI, or LLM 360 or Lucy in France, right? So true reproducibility is rare, but it's possible, right? So I spoke a lot about the Linux moment, and obviously, open source moment, let's say, but Linux is more like, okay. It's not the only component of the Linux moment that I observe with GenAI. There are other axes, other aspects of this Linux moment, but I will share a few of them very quickly here. The other aspect that makes a Linux moment for me is all the ecosystem and collaborative tools that are emerging, right? So you have tools like, that's just a few examples, right? Archive is not dedicated to AI at all, but it's a good platform for researchers to exchange their results, you know? Jupyter, and with notebooks, is a good way to exchange recipe and for people to very quickly go on the learning curve, you know, and exchange some tricks and on data science. Hugging Face is a cornerstone now. It's the GitHub of AI, let's say. It's a good place to find some open, and I stay on open model, open data set, open spaces, which are open application or example of application using the models, for instance. And when you have this kind of collaboration, this kind of collaborative dynamism, then you have also a collaborative and a collective innovation going on. And we saw, even on the business model, not even on the technical side, you have some innovation. Innovation being like, maybe we just reproduce some new business model that we discovered with open source into the open weight model or open source model domain, right? Like Mistral, for instance. You also have a lot of democratization that is done to be able to optimize the model and maybe think or change the way we deploy them, right? So optimization, hardware optimization, right? So that's why I put XPU, whatever, GPU, TPU, NPU, whatever the name, but AI chips, right? So AI chips now is the new gold, right? Starting this year or the next year, every new PC that you will buy will be equipped with some kind of AI chips. Tomorrow it will be in the phone. And in 1 year or two, or maybe less than that, I guess China will start flooding the market with GPUs, cheaper than NVIDIA, that kind of stuff. It's geopolitics also, right? So there's a lot of work optimizing things on the hardware level. On the software level also, so I was speaking at the beginning of the talk about small language model. You also have tiny language model. The idea is to have smaller models that are more specialized or don't need to know all the knowledge of humankind to be used as an agent, if you have an agentic architecture that you're working on, for instance, right? So you can to run them locally or in your Docker container. You also have techniques. I spoke about distillation, how to transfer some knowledge to a less smart model, but keep his size, but just the knowledge is transferred. Or you have quantization, which is basically a way to reduce the quality of the output, but a trade-off with the performance and the size that it will require to run. You also have optimization that are made in how to deploy, like on Kubernetes. Yesterday or the day before here in this conference, I saw a very interesting talk on this aspect. So there are ecosystems that are tackling about how will make it easy to deploy LLMs, like for instance on the Kubernetes infrastructure. And you also have people who are trying to see how we could decentralize in a, it's not a bad word, but blockchain way, whatever it's blockchain or not, but completely decentralized, both training and inference, right? So people are working on that also. That would be another way of consuming and making LLMs also. And finally, you also have all the open source, and this time it's open source, tools and frameworks that are available, that are rising, emerging, to help you, me, use these models for our business requirements, right? So how easy it is to build an application that is consuming an LLM, whatever the type of LLM it is, as soon as you are aware, again, about the license and what you can or cannot do with it, right? LangChain is an example of that. It's interesting because it started as a Python framework, coming from the data science domain, right? And then it was ported in JavaScript and in Java with LangChain 4j, right? And even if LangChain is the same name, you see that it's done the Java way, right? And now with Babylon and everything that we heard in the keynote this morning, you see that really it is expanding, and the open source is also inferring with that by providing all the tools and all the means for us to build things, right? And they do it in the open source or the Unix way, like let's do one thing, but let's do it good. Not try to master everything and to occupy all the playground here, right? So by doing that, what open source community are very used to do is let standard emerge, right? Because you need interoperability. You need the way to integrate those different bricks. That's the natural way of thinking of open source communities. And that's how you saw standards like Onyx or GGML to exchange the model or even run them with Onyx. That's how you saw LangChain. And we speak a lot about agent. You also have MCP, A2A, a lot of new standards that are emerging because of the same need. Now LLMs are there. How will you consume? How will you integrate them? How will you insert them in your own architectures, right? And OAI is open source AI, OpenAI API, sorry. It's my law. So it's a standard way of consuming, the verbs and the addresses to access the LLM. So you have a lot of things, and it's going beyond Python. Obviously, here we are in DevOps. I mean, it's a kind of Java event, and here Java and AI, it's in every talk, right? So things are really going on, and just what I want to finish, I will finish in a few minutes, but there are other initiatives, all right, to evaluate LLM openness. When I started, there were not so much, all right? Now you have the open source initiative who decided to define what is open source AI. So there's a lot of discussion, even polemics, because with the data it's not easy, all right, to be very clear and to have the global consensus. But it's version 2, version 1. It's a work in progress. But they did something that was very courageous, is define it, because in the AI Act in Europe, it's specified when you're an open source model, when you're open source AI, you're exempted from some of the restriction, the do and don'ts that you can do as a model provider. But it's not defined what an open source AI is in the AI Act. So somebody had to define that. All right, so they did it, right? The Linux Foundation, who also participated in all the discussion of the open source AI definition, has his own model openness framework. You also have things from the academic side with the CRFM and the Foundational Model Transparency Index. It's very extensive, very huge, very research, very not usable by the industry to my eyes, right? And you can also have some governmental initiatives, like in France with the AI model openness comparator. My point is whatever the methodology you use to check, whether it's mine, it's not even a methodology, just way of discovering things, or OpenAI or Morph or whatever. The good reflex is just check the licenses, because even now, it took me, like in my company, so many years to try to inform the developers, the tech lead, the managers, the decision makers. They say, hey, check open source, man, because you're adopting a lot of components, and then at the end of the day, when you're about to release the product, the service, or the project to your customer, then suddenly you remember that maybe there are some restrictions because of the license you used to build the critical system, right? And it's always more painful to do it afterwards. So it's a good way to educate, to just take this reflex, step back, and check the license, whatever the method is, right? So let's wrap up very quickly. In this continuum between open research, closed API, open weight, whether it's restricted or permissive, and free AI, like in freedom, maybe one day, I don't know if you have copyleft licenses on weight and dataset, who knows, right? Just remember a few things that we discovered. Dataset, we have to check, right? Because you can have some limitation. Upstream model, open weight or not, you may have some restriction also, even if it's a fine-tuned version of this foundational model. You can have competition clauses. You can have restriction related to responsible AI, and everyone will have his own definition of what is responsible AI. So just check what is this definition is. And we're in the competitive phase of the adoption curve, and we're moving or already in the cooperative ecosystem, co-petition, let's say, because of this openness, right, that will promote reuse or is promoting reuse and collaboration. We saw some examples, and we saw that big players are also entering the game. And this collaboration will lead to commoditization. That was my point at the beginning. And more innovation, because we'll move up the scale and higher order of innovation that we'll start to do, like, for instance, agentic infrastructure or robotics tomorrow, or that kind of new usage that will emerge. So instead of a Linux moment, I was speaking a lot of a Linux moment at the beginning of the talk. I can speak now about a Linux movement. It's not a moment in time, it's a movement. And we saw how it already reshaped the area and the domain of LLM in general, and it will keep reshaping it in the future. So AI and open source are completely compatible. They're even concomitant, right? So thank you for your attention. Thanks. A few QR codes. This one is for your feedback. It's very important. Feedback is a gift, so please give me some feedback on this talk. And this one is a link to an agent, let's say a gem that I put on Gemini, to be able to scan with the methodology I just presented any model that you want. You, of course, have to check the result, as always, but it's a very good way to start, right? So you can just scan it and use it if you're using Gemini, and it will reproduce the table, some of the table that I use in this presentation. Thank you very much.